The Council found humanity's secret weapon. It wasn't a weapon. HFY. The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly was built from black stone that came from a dead star. It stood at the center of the space station called Concord, which floated between three suns in neutral space. Hundreds of species met here to talk, to trade, and sometimes to argue about war. Today, the chamber was full, and the argument was about a single small species that called itself human. Ambassador Threl Vondu of the Kalan stood at the speaker's platform. His skin was a deep blue, and his long fingers trembled slightly as he raised a data screen for everyone to see. The screen showed a battle recording. It showed 12 human ships facing 40 raider ships near a mining colony called Verath Station. By every measure the Assembly understood, the humans should have lost. Their ships were smaller, their weapons were weaker on paper, their shields were nothing special. But the humans had won. Not only had they won, they had done it without losing a single ship. "We do not understand this," Threl said, his voice carrying through the chamber without need of a microphone, thanks to the acoustics built into the black stone. "We have studied human technology for 6 years, since first contact. Their engines are ordinary. Their weapons are ordinary. And yet, 3 times now, small human forces have defeated much larger raider fleets. Something is happening that we cannot explain." A murmur passed through the chamber. Council members leaned toward each other, whispering in a dozen different languages. Some species used sound. Some used light patterns on their skin. Some used scent, which the chamber's air filters worked hard to keep separate from other delegations. At the far end of the chamber, seated in the section reserved for observer species, sat a human woman named Sarah Chen. She was Earth's ambassador to the Assembly, and she had been given the honor of speaking after the council debate, though she was not yet a full voting member. She listened carefully, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm. She had expected this conversation to happen eventually. She just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The Threx delegate rose next. The Threx were a tall, broad species covered in gray plates like armor. They were known across the galaxy as warriors, and their opinion on military matters carried great weight. Their delegate, a scarred veteran named Korath, spoke in a low growl that the translation devices turned into common speech. "I have fought raiders myself," Korath said. "I know their tactics. They do not lose to weak fleets. If the humans defeated them without losses, then the humans have something we have not seen. A weapon. Perhaps a weapon hidden from our sensors. Perhaps a new kind of shield. Whatever it is, the Assembly should know about it before the humans decide to use it on someone else." Sarah Chen wanted to stand and object right there, but the rules of the Assembly said observer species could not speak until asked. So she waited, and her patience was tested as more delegates rose to share their fears. The Za delegate, a small insect-like being with clicking mandibles, spoke through a translator box strapped to her thorax. "We have detected strange energy signatures near human colonies. A project the humans call, in their language, Sanctuary. We do not know what this project produces. It could be a factory. It could be a weapons laboratory. The humans have not explained it to us, though we have asked 3 times through diplomatic channels." This was true, and Sarah knew it. The Assembly had asked about Project Sanctuary before. Earth's government had simply said it was a humanitarian project and left it at that, because the full explanation was complicated, and because, frankly, nobody in the Assembly had ever asked the right question. They had asked, "What are you building?" as if it were a factory. Nobody had asked, "Who are you helping?" The debate went back and forth for almost 2 hours. Some delegates argued that humanity should be welcomed fully into the Assembly, since Earth had followed every law and treaty since first contact. Others argued that a mystery this large could not be ignored, especially from a species so young and so unpredictable. The younger species in the galaxy, after all, had caused trouble before. There was the incident with the Vosk, centuries ago, a proud young species that had built secret war fleets behind the Assembly's back and nearly started a war that killed billions before it was stopped. Nobody wanted another Vosk. Finally, the Speaker of the Assembly, an ancient Dravith elder named Osimir, raised a clawed hand for silence. The Dravith were one of the oldest member species, and their word carried enormous respect. Osimir's voice was slow and deep, like stones grinding together. We will not accuse the humans of wrongdoing, Osimir said. They have broken no law. But the Assembly has a right to understand the strength of its members, especially a member as young as Earth. I propose we send an observer to walk among the humans, to see this project sanctuary with their own eyes, and to report back the truth. Not spy work, not war preparation, simple observation, done with the humans' permission. The chamber murmured its agreement. Sarah Chen, finally given permission to speak, rose from her seat. Earth welcomes an observer, she said simply. We have nothing to hide. Send whoever the Assembly trusts, and we will show them everything they wish to see. There was a pause, and then Osimir spoke again. Then it is decided. We will send one of our own. Not a soldier, not a diplomat with old grudges. Someone young enough to see clearly, and clever enough to understand what they find. The chamber began discussing candidates, and this took another hour, because every species wanted their own observer to be chosen, believing their people would do the best job. In the end, the choice surprised many. A young Kalin named Vesa Rin, barely out of the Assembly's training academy, was chosen. She was smart, unbiased, and had no history with humans at all. She had never even seen one in person. Vesa was called into the chamber to receive her assignment. She was smaller than most Kalin, with pale blue skin and large golden eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore the simple gray robe of an Assembly cadet, not yet a full ambassador, still learning her trade. When Osimir told her she would travel to Earth to investigate the secret weapon of humanity, her eyes widened, but she did not argue. This was the kind of mission every young diplomat dreamed of. You will not lie to them, Osimir told her privately, after the chamber had emptied. You will not spy in secret. You will ask, and you will watch, and you will tell the Assembly what you find, good or bad. Do you understand? I understand, Vesa said. But Elder, may I ask something? Ask? What do you believe we will find? Osimir was quiet for a long moment, his old eyes distant, remembering things Vesa could not know. I have lived a long time, he finally said. I have seen species rise with weapons that could crack planets, and I have seen those same species fall to nothing but their own fear. I do not know what the humans have built, but I have read their history, young one. It is a history of great cruelty and great kindness, often from the same people, in the same lifetime. Whatever you find, I suspect it will not be simple. Vesa left the chamber with those words echoing in her mind. 3 days later, she boarded a small Assembly transport ship bound for the Sol system, carrying only a single travel case and a translation device fitted for human languages. She had studied English on the journey, though she was told most humans in the Assembly's diplomatic circles also spoke a common trade language that made translation easy. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and Vesa pressed her face to the viewport like a child, staring at the small blue and green planet growing larger ahead. She had seen images of Earth before, in briefing files, but nothing prepared her for seeing it with her own eyes. It looked so fragile, she thought, so small, floating there against the black. It was strange to think that this tiny world had produced a species that worried the entire Galactic Assembly. A human shuttle met her ship in orbit, guiding her down through the atmosphere to a city called Geneva, where the Earth government had built its diplomatic quarter specifically for meetings with Assembly species. Sarah Chen herself was waiting at the landing pad when Vesa stepped off the shuttle, her boots touching human soil for the first time. Ambassador Vesa Rin, Sarah said, extending a hand in the human custom of greeting. Vesa had studied this gesture and copied it, gripping Sarah's hand gently. Welcome to Earth. I hope your journey was comfortable. It was, Vesa said. Thank you for allowing this visit, Ambassador Chen. Please, call me Sarah. We're not big on titles here, not among friends. Sarah smiled, and Vesa noted the expression, comparing it to the descriptions in her briefing files. A smile, she had read, could mean many things among humans. Joy, kindness, nervousness, even anger in rare cases. She would need to learn to read it properly. I have been asked to observe your project sanctuary, Vesa said, deciding to be direct, since that was the manner she had been taught worked best with humans. The Assembly believes it may be connected to your recent military victories. Sarah's smile did not fade, but something shifted behind her eyes, something Vesa could not quite name yet. I figured that's why they sent you, Sarah said. Come on, I'll take you there myself. It's not far. But I should warn you, Vesa. It's probably not what you're expecting. They walked together toward a waiting vehicle, and Vesa glanced back once at the shuttle that had brought her, feeling suddenly very far from the black stone chamber of the assembly, very far from everything familiar. She did not know yet that the next weeks would change everything she believed about power, about weapons, and about the strange, complicated species called humanity. The vehicle pulled away from the landing pad and joined a wide road full of other vehicles, all moving in smooth, organized lines. Vesa watched the city pass by the window, tall buildings mixed with old stone structures centuries old, green parks full of children playing games she did not recognize, and everywhere, humans of every color and shape, walking together, talking together, living their small lives without any idea that far above them, in a black stone chamber, powerful beings were arguing about whether their species was dangerous. Can I ask you something? Vesa said, breaking the silence. Of course, Sarah said, keeping her eyes on the road, though Vesa had learned the vehicle mostly drove itself. The assembly fears humanity has hidden a great weapon. Some believe it is a machine, others believe it is a strange technology, something beyond what we understand. What would you say, if I asked you directly, what weapon does humanity have? Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, her voice was soft, almost sad. I'd say the assembly is asking the wrong question, she said. But you're young, and you came a long way to find the answer yourself. I won't spoil it for you. Just keep your eyes open, Vesa, and maybe don't think about it like a soldier. Think about it like someone visiting a home. Vesa did not fully understand what Sarah meant, not yet, but she nodded and turned back to the window, watching the strange, busy, beautiful little world roll past, filled with a species she had traveled across the galaxy to understand. Neither of them spoke of the raiders again that day, though far away, near the edges of human space, 3 more raider ships had gone quiet after making contact with a human patrol. No wreckage was found. No survivors were reported. The raiders had simply stopped transmitting, and nobody yet knew why. The investigation was only beginning. The vehicle stopped outside a large building on the edge of Geneva, near a lake that reflected the afternoon sun like polished glass. The building did not look like a weapons laboratory. It did not look military at all. It looked like a school, or perhaps a hospital, with wide windows and a garden full of flowers in front. Children's laughter drifted out from somewhere behind the building, carried on the wind. Vesa stepped out of the vehicle slowly, studying the structure with the trained eye of an assembly observer. She looked for hidden sensors, for guard posts, for any sign of the security a species would use to protect a dangerous secret. She found none. A single elderly human sat at a small desk near the front doors, reading a paper book, and he looked up and waved at Sarah as they approached. "Afternoon, Sarah," he said. "New friend?" "This is Vesa Rin, from the assembly," Sarah said. "She's here to see the sanctuary." The old man's face broke into a warm smile, and he set down his book. "Well, welcome. Welcome. Go right on in. The little ones are having lunch right now, so it might be loud." Vesa followed Sarah through the front doors, her mind working quickly, trying to understand what kind of facility hid its danger behind an old man reading books at a desk. Inside, the building opened into a bright hallway lined with paintings, most of them clearly made by children, full of bright colors and simple shapes. Vesa paused at one painting that showed a strange creature with too many legs, holding hands with a human child under a yellow sun. "What is this place?" Vesa asked. "Keep watching," Sarah said gently. "You'll understand faster than I could explain." They walked further into the building, and the sound of laughter grew louder. They turned a corner into a wide open room filled with tables, and Vesa stopped in the doorway, her golden eyes going wide. The room was full of children. Human children, yes, dozens of them, but also children of other species. Vesa recognized a small group of Threx younglings, their gray plates not yet hardened, sitting at a table with 3 human children, all of them laughing over some game involving colored blocks. Near the window, a young Za, barely out of its larval stage, clicked its mandibles happily, while a human woman helped it hold a spoon in its unfamiliar claws. In the corner, two small Vosk children, a species Vesa had read about only in old history files, a species the Assembly had once gone to war against, sat quietly coloring pictures, watched over by a kind-faced human teenager. "I don't understand," Vesa said quietly. "These are children from a dozen different species. Why are they here, together, on Earth?" Sarah's expression grew serious, though her voice stayed gentle. "Most of them are refugees," she said. "Some lost their families in the Vosk-Dravith border conflicts. Some were victims of raider attacks, like the ones near Verath Station your Assembly is so worried about. Some were simply abandoned, or their homeworlds became too dangerous to raise a child. We started this program 4 years ago, after the Threx Civil War left thousands of orphans with nowhere to go, and no species willing to take them in." "Nowhere to go," Vesa repeated. "Surely the Assembly has protocols for refugee children." "The Assembly has protocols for refugee adults," Sarah said. "Protocols for trade disputes, for territory claims, for 100 other things. But there was no single agency willing to take in children from a dozen species at once, feed them, teach them, and raise them without asking what species they belong to first. So we did it. Earth did it. We didn't have the biggest fleet or the richest colonies, but we had room, and we had people willing to help." Vesa watched the room for a long moment, unable to find words. A small Threx child had knocked over a cup of juice, and immediately, 2 human children rushed to help clean it up, laughing rather than blaming the youngling for the accident. The Threx child, instead of showing the shame Vesa expected from her studies of that proud warrior species, simply laughed too, and the 3 of them went back to their game. "This is Project Sanctuary," Vesa said slowly, understanding dawning. "This is what the Assembly detected. Not a weapons laboratory, a home for orphans." "Not just orphans," Sarah said. "We have refugee families here too, entire families displaced by war or disaster, from a dozen different systems. Sanctuary isn't one building, Vesa. It's a network. We have facilities like this one on 6 continents, and 3 more on our colony worlds. Thousands of people call it home now." Vesa's mind raced, trying to connect this discovery to the battle records she had studied on the journey here, the 12 human ships that had defeated 40 raiders without a single loss. "But this does not explain the battles," she said. "This does not explain your victories against the raiders. A shelter for children is not a weapon." Sarah's expression grew complicated then, something between sadness and pride. "Walk with me," she said. "There's someone I want you to meet." They left the dining hall and walked down another corridor, this one quieter, until they reached a small office where a Threx woman sat behind a desk, her gray plates marked with old battle scars, though her posture was relaxed, and her large hands moved gently over a stack of paper files. She looked up as they entered, and her eyes, when they found Vesa, showed something like curiosity mixed with old caution, the look of a warrior sizing up a stranger. "Vesa, this is Director Cora," Sarah said. "She runs this facility. Cora, this is Vesa Rin, from the Assembly. She's here about the Verath incident." Cora rose from her chair, and even sitting she had looked large, but standing she towered over both of them, easily 2 heads taller than Vesa. Vesa felt a flicker of the old fear Assembly citizens were taught to feel around Threx warriors, but Cora's posture was not threatening. It was simply tired, the posture of someone who had worked a long day. "Assembly," Cora said, her growling voice carrying no anger, only weight. "I know why you're here. Everyone always asks the same question eventually. What's the weapon? Where do the humans hide the weapon?" "Yes," Vesa admitted. "That is what I have been sent to learn." Cora sat back down, gesturing for them to take the seats across from her desk. "I was a soldier once," she said. "Fought in the Threx Civil War, on the losing side, if you want the truth of it. My unit was wiped out. My homeworld turned its back on refugees like me, called us traitors for surrendering instead of dying with honor. I had nowhere to go. No fleet would take me. No world would house me. I was ready to die out there in the black, alone, when a human transport ship found my escape pod." She paused, her claws tapping softly against the desk, remembering. They didn't ask what side I fought for. They didn't ask if I deserved help. They just helped, fed me, fixed my wounds, gave me a room on their ship, and asked nothing in return, except that I not hurt anyone while I was there. It took me a year to understand that they meant it, that there was no trick, no hidden cost. And now I run this place, because I decided that if humans could do that for a stranger like me, I could do it for these children. Vesa sat in silence, processing everything she had heard. But this still does not explain the battles, she finally said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. Cora's mouth curled into something like a smile, a rare expression on a Threk's face. Doesn't it, she said. Ask yourself, little diplomat. When those raiders attacked Verath Station, who answered the call for help? Human ships, yes, but whose ships flew alongside them? Vesa frowned, trying to recall the battle records from her briefing files. She had focused so completely on the human vessels that she had not paid close attention to the others in the formation. There were other ships in the battle, she said slowly. I assumed they were simply Allied merchant vessels caught nearby. They weren't caught nearby, Cora said. They came because they were called, and they came because years ago, humans helped them when nobody else would. Threk's exiles like me. Ja colonies abandoned during the border wars. Vosk families who lost everything when their homeworld fell into civil war. When humans ask for help now, an entire quiet network of grateful strangers answers. Not because of any treaty, not because of any law, because they remember. Sarah spoke softly then, watching Vesa's face carefully. That's the thing the assembly keeps missing, she said. You're all looking for a weapon built in a laboratory. But the thing that's kept us safe isn't something we built in secret. It's something we did openly, for years, right in front of everyone, and nobody thought it was important enough to notice. Vesa sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. She thought of the black stone chamber far above, of Korath, the Threk's warrior, demanding to know what secret weapon humanity had built, of Threl Vondu, showing battle footage as if it proved some hidden danger. She thought of Elder Osimir's words. A history of great cruelty and great kindness, often from the same people, in the same lifetime. I need to see more, Vesa said finally. I need to understand how deep this network goes. If what you're telling me is true, this changes everything the Assembly believes about humanity's strength. It's true, Cora said simply, and it goes deeper than you think. Stay a while, Assembly diplomat. Watch. Ask questions. You'll find your answer, but I don't think it'll be the one you expected to write in your report. That night, Vesa was given a small guest room in the sanctuary building itself, rather than a diplomatic hotel, at her own request. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Earth night, the wind through the trees outside her window, the distant hum of the city. She thought about the children she had seen that day, laughing together despite their different shapes and different histories, and she thought about the old Threx woman who had once been ready to die alone in the black, now surrounded by children who called her family. She did not sleep well. Her mind kept turning the puzzle over, searching for the trick, the hidden cost, the weapon buried beneath the kindness. She had been trained her whole life to find the danger behind every diplomatic smile. But the deeper she searched that night, the less she found, and the more she began to suspect that there was, in fact, nothing hidden here at all. Just something so large and so simple that nobody had thought to call it what it was. 2 days later, an urgent message reached the sanctuary from the Assembly's monitoring station near the border colonies. A large raider fleet, far larger than the one at Verath, had been spotted moving toward a small mixed-species colony called New Meridian, a world settled jointly by human colonists and refugee families from 3 other species, all of them people the sanctuary network had once helped. Sarah's face went pale when she read the message. Cora rose from her desk immediately, already reaching for a communicator, and Vesa, watching them both, understood that she was about to see, with her own eyes, exactly what kind of weapon the humans truly possessed. The raider fleet that approached New Meridian belonged to a group called the Drenner Remnant, the leftover pieces of an old pirate empire that the Assembly had broken apart a generation ago. Most of the Drennar's great warships had been destroyed or captured back then, but a stubborn core of captains had fled into unclaimed space, rebuilding their strength in the shadows for years, striking small, undefended colonies whenever they thought they could win quickly and leave before help arrived. New Meridian looked like an easy target. Assembly records listed it as a small farming colony with no military defenses of its own, home to about 40,000 people. What the Drennar captains did not know, because it was not written in any assembly file, was who those 40,000 people actually were. Vesa stood in the sanctuary's communication room, watching a wall screen filled with data streaming in from New Meridian's automated distress beacon. Cora stood beside her, arms crossed, her scarred face tight with tension. Sarah worked at a console nearby, speaking rapidly into a communicator, coordinating with Earth's small defense fleet. "How many raider ships?" Vesa asked. "Beacon reports 63, Cora said grimly. "Big ones, too. Battle cruisers, not just raiders. This isn't a smash-and-grab attack. Someone wants to make an example out of New Meridian." 63 ships against a farming colony with no defenses, Vesa said, her voice tight. "How quickly can the Assembly send help?" Cora's laugh was short and humorless. "The Assembly? They'll debate it for 3 days, before anyone even votes on whether New Meridian's charter qualifies for military assistance. No, little diplomat. Nobody's waiting on the Assembly for this." Sarah turned from her console, her face pale but steady. "Earth's fleet is mobilizing," she said. 9 ships, all we have close enough to reach New Meridian in time. It won't be enough alone, but I've sent the call out." "The call?" Vesa asked. "Watch," Cora said simply. Vesa watched the screen as new signals began appearing on the display, one after another, each representing a ship changing course toward New Meridian. She leaned closer, reading the ship registries as they populated the screen. Human vessels, yes, but also others. A cluster of Threx exile ships, veterans of the same civil war Cora had fought in, changing course from a mining operation 3 systems away. A convoy of Za science vessels, converting their scanning arrays into makeshift weapons platforms as they redirected toward the battle. Even 2 small Vosk transport ships, a species Vesa had been taught to think of as broken and scattered since their homeworld's collapse, turning from their trade routes to join the fight. "They're all coming," Vesa said quietly, watching the numbers grow. Ships from a dozen different origins, none of them ordered by any government, none of them bound by any treaty. "Nobody ordered them," Sarah said. "They just heard New Meridian was in danger and they remembered." Within 2 hours, the growing coalition fleet numbered 31 ships, still fewer than the Drennar raiders, but no longer a hopeless mismatch. Vesa insisted on traveling with the response, and after a brief argument, Cora agreed to bring her aboard the Sanctuary's own transport ship, which was retrofitted for emergency medical support, and joined the fleet as a rear guard, ready to treat the wounded. The journey took 11 hours at faster-than-light speed. Vesa spent most of it in the ship's small observation deck, watching the stars streak past, running calculations in her mind, trying to understand the strange arithmetic of a fleet built not from orders but from memory and gratitude. She thought of the black stone chamber again, of Korath demanding to know what secret weapon the humans hid, and she began, slowly, painfully, to suspect the truth was something the old warrior would never have thought to look for. They arrived at New Meridian just as the battle began. The Drennar fleet had already entered orbit, their battle cruisers moving into position above the colony's largest settlement, a farming town called Haven's Rest. Vesa watched through the observation deck's reinforced window as the first wave of Drennar fighters descended toward the town, weapons already charging, ready to demand tribute or simply begin destroying homes to force surrender. Then the coalition fleet arrived, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that surprised even Vesa, who had studied battle tactics extensively during her assembly training. The ships did not arrive in a neat, ordered line, the way assembly fleets typically did. They arrived scattered, each captain making instant decisions based on years of trust in their allies, forming defensive walls around the town within seconds, human ships flying wingtip to wingtip with Threx cruisers, Ja science vessels providing sensor support that let smaller ships dodge incoming fire with impossible precision. "They've fought together before," Vesa said, watching the formation lock into place. This is not the first time. It's not even the 10th time, Cora said, strapping into a chair on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. We drill together, we train together, whenever we can, because we all know someday one of us might need the others to show up exactly like this. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the records Vesa had studied. The Drenar captains, expecting an easy massacre of an undefended colony, found themselves facing a coordinated defense that moved and reacted as if it were a single organism, rather than 31 separate ships from a dozen different species. A human destroyer took a direct hit meant for a smaller Za science vessel, its shields flaring bright, before holding just long enough for the Za ship to escape and return fire. A Threx cruiser, badly damaged, refused to retreat, instead pushing forward to block a Drenar battle cruiser's path toward the town, buying precious seconds for 2 Vosk transport ships to evacuate civilians from a farming settlement directly in the line of fire. Vesa watched all of this from the medical transport's observation deck, her golden eyes wide, her translation device forgotten in her lap. She was not thinking in the language of assembly reports anymore. She was thinking in something closer to awe. They fight like family, she said quietly. Cora, listening from her chair, allowed herself a grim smile. That's because we are, she said. Doesn't matter what species raised you, or what world you came from. When someone gives you a home when you had none, when someone stands beside you when everyone else turned away, that makes you family. Blood's got nothing to do with it. The battle raged for nearly 3 hours. The Drenar remnant, though experienced raiders, had never faced a defense like this, and their formation began to fracture under the Coalition's relentless, coordinated resistance. Vesa watched as human tactical officers relayed real-time battle data to Threx gunners, as Za sensor arrays fed targeting solutions to human weapon systems, as the entire Coalition fleet moved and adapted with a fluid trust that no single assembly protocol could have taught them. Then came the moment that would later be recorded in assembly archives as the turning point of the Battle of New Meridian, though at the time, it happened too fast for anyone to fully process. A Drenar battle cruiser, badly damaged but still dangerous, made a desperate final charge toward Haven's Rest, its weapons locked onto the town's main shelter, where hundreds of colonists, including dozens of children, had taken refuge. No ship in the Coalition fleet had a clear firing angle to stop it in time. The cruiser's weapons began to charge, and for one terrible second, it seemed nothing could prevent the shelter's destruction. Then a small human medical transport, the very ship Vesa stood aboard, broke formation and threw itself directly into the cruiser's firing line. "Cora!" Vesa shouted, gripping the edge of her chair as the ship's engines roared, the pilot making a decision in a fraction of a second that would either save hundreds of lives or end their own. "Hold on," Cora said, her voice steady despite the danger, already strapping in tighter, her scarred hands gripping the chair's arms. This is what we do. The Drenar cruiser's weapons fired, and the medical transport's shields absorbed the blast, flaring white-hot, alarms screaming through the ship. Vesa was thrown against her restraints, her vision blurring for a moment as the ship shuddered violently. When her sight cleared, she saw through the observation deck window that the shelter below remained untouched, its lights still glowing steadily in the growing darkness of the battle. The medical transport had taken the hit meant for hundreds of children, and though badly damaged, it had held. 2 Threx cruisers immediately broke formation to cover the wounded transport, and a Vosk gunship added its fire to help finish off the crippled Drenar cruiser before it could attempt another strike. Within minutes, the remaining Drenar ships, seeing their attack fleet crumbling under the Coalition's relentless, coordinated defense, began a disorganized retreat, jumping to faster-than-light travel one by one, until the space above New Meridian was quiet once more. Vesa sat in silence for a long moment after the battle ended, her hands still gripping the edge of her chair, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. A ship full of medical supplies, crewed partly by a Threx exile, and staffed with a young assembly diplomat who had never fired a weapon in her life, had thrown itself into the path of an enemy warship to protect children it had never met. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you risk this ship, Cora? Why would the pilot risk all our lives for a shelter full of strangers?" Cora unstrapped herself slowly, wincing at a bruise from the impact, and looked at Vesa with an expression that held no anger, only quiet certainty. Because someday, little diplomat, it might be your ship needing help, and someone else's turn to make that same choice. That's not a weapon we built in secret. That's just who we decided to be, a long time ago, and we've been building it ever since, one act of kindness at a time. Vesa said nothing more for the rest of the journey back to New Meridian's surface, but that night, sitting alone in her borrowed quarters aboard the damaged medical transport, she began writing her report to the assembly. It would take her hours to find the right words, because the truth she needed to explain was not a truth easily fit into the careful, cautious language of assembly diplomacy. She had been sent to find humanity's secret weapon. She had found something far larger, and far harder to explain to a chamber full of beings who had spent their whole lives searching for danger instead of looking for kindness. Far above, in the black stone chamber on Concord Station, Elder Osimir waited for her report, wondering, not for the first time, whether the assembly was ready to hear an answer it had never expected to receive. The medical transport limped back to New Meridian's surface 2 days after the battle, its hull scarred black in places, one engine still smoking faintly despite the crew's repairs. Vesa stepped off the ship onto the colony's landing field and found the whole town waiting to greet the returning fleet. Farmers stood alongside soldiers. Children ran between the legs of Threk's warriors twice their height, laughing, handing out flowers grown in Haven's Rest's greenhouses to any crew member who would take one. An elderly human woman approached Cora first, tears in her eyes, and wrapped her arms around the tall Threk's director without hesitation. Cora, who Vesa had watched calmly order ships into a war zone without flinching, seemed almost embarrassed by the gesture, but she returned the embrace gently, her large clawed hands careful not to hurt the fragile woman. "You saved my grandchildren," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved this whole town." "We all did," Cora said. "Every ship out there. Don't thank just me." Vesa stood a little apart from the celebration, watching, still turning over the events of the battle in her mind. A young human boy, no older than 8, tugged at her sleeve, and she looked down to see him holding up a small paper flower, clumsily folded, clearly made by a child's hands. "For you," the boy said simply, pushing it into her palm. "My mom said the assembly people helped bring the fleet. Thank you." Vesa looked at the paper flower for a long moment, unsure how to respond. She had not fired a single weapon during the battle. She had done nothing but watch and write notes for a report the boy would never see, and yet he thanked her, as if she had personally stood between his town and destruction. "You are welcome," she finally said, because it seemed like the only true thing she could say. That evening, before the medical transport departed for the journey back to Earth, Vesa requested a private conversation with Cora and Sarah, who had traveled separately aboard Earth's defense fleet and arrived at New Meridian shortly after the battle's end to help coordinate relief efforts. They met in a small farmhouse converted into a temporary command post, sitting around a wooden table that still smelled faintly of fresh bread from whatever family had lived there before the war came to their doorstep. "I need to understand something," Vesa said, setting her datapad on the table, though she had not yet finished writing her report. "The assembly believes strength comes from technology, from weapons, from the size of a fleet. I have spent my entire training learning to measure these things. But what I witnessed at New Meridian cannot be measured that way. Ships from a dozen different species, none of them ordered by any government, arrived to defend a colony most of them had never even visited before. How do I explain that to the assembly in language they will accept?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Cora before answering. "Maybe you don't try to explain it in their language," she said. "Maybe you explain it in the language you learned here." "I do not understand," Vesa admitted. Cora leaned forward, resting her large arms on the table. "Little diplomat, let me ask you something. When that Drenar cruiser charged toward the shelter and our transport moved to block it, what were you thinking?" Vesa hesitated, remembering the terror of that moment, the alarms, the shuddering impact. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I did not want to die. But beneath that fear, I understood why the pilot made that choice. There was no other option that would have saved the children in time. It was simply necessary." "That's it," Cora said. That's the whole answer. Right there. It wasn't heroism, not really. Not the way your old stories probably describe it. It was just the only choice that made sense to people who had already decided, a long time ago, that protecting each other mattered more than protecting themselves. Once you decide that, every hard choice after it gets a little easier. But why would humans decide that? Vesa pressed. Why would an entire species choose this, when the assembly has taught for centuries that strength comes from self-interest, from careful alliances built on mutual benefit, not blind sacrifice for strangers? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. Humans haven't always chosen this, she finally said. Our history is full of terrible cruelty, Vesa. Wars, slavery, all kinds of horrors we're not proud of. But somewhere along the way, enough of us learned a hard lesson, that a society built only on self-interest eventually eats itself. Trust doesn't come from treaties. It comes from people showing up for each other when it costs them something. When we first met species like Koras, refugees with nowhere to go, we had a choice. Turn them away, protect our own resources, our own safety, or take a risk, open our doors, and hope it built something stronger than fear ever could. And it worked, Vesa said slowly. It worked because we kept doing it, over and over, even when it was hard, even when some people argued we couldn't afford it, Sarah said. Every family the sanctuary took in, every exile ship we gave shelter to, every colony we helped rebuild after a disaster, it all added up. Not into a weapon exactly, into something more like a promise. And when a promise gets kept enough times, people start showing up to keep it themselves, without being asked. Vesa sat back, absorbing this, her mind working through the implications. The battle records the assembly studied, she said slowly. The victories against the raiders, at Verath, and now at New Meridian. They were not won because humanity built superior weapons in secret. No, Cora said. They were won because an entire network of grateful allies chose, freely, to fight alongside humanity, out of loyalty, built through years of kindness, rather than treaty obligation. Now you're getting it, Cora said, something like pride in her rough voice. Vesa picked up her datapad and finally began writing in earnest, the words coming easier now that she understood what she needed to say. She worked through most of the night, occasionally pausing to ask Sarah or Cora a clarifying question, filling her report with details of the sanctuary network, the exile ships, the coalition fleet's spontaneous defense of New Meridian, the medical transport that had thrown itself into a warship's path to save a shelter full of children. When she finally finished, just before dawn, she read the report once more, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt something settle in her chest, a certainty she had not expected to find. She had been sent to discover a weapon. What she had found instead was something the Assembly's old fears had never prepared her to recognize, a species that had built its greatest strength, not from what it could destroy, but from what it was willing to protect, even at great cost to itself. She transmitted the report to the Assembly that morning, marked for Elder Osimir's personal attention, and requested an emergency session of the full council to present her findings in person. The response came faster than she expected. Within hours, a formal summons arrived, calling her back to Concord Station immediately. The Assembly, it seemed, was eager to hear what its young observer had discovered, though Vesa suspected some delegates, particularly Korath of the Threx and Threl Vondu of the Kalen, were expecting confirmation of their worst fears, rather than the truth she now carried. Before she departed New Meridian, Cora walked her to the landing field one final time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmland, and somewhere nearby, children's laughter drifted on the wind, a sound Vesa had come to associate with this strange, complicated, generous species she had traveled so far to understand. "Whatever happens up there," Cora said, gesturing toward the sky, "remember what you saw here. The Assembly's going to want easy answers. War is easy to understand. Weapons are easy to measure. What we've built here isn't easy, and it never has been. It took years, and it cost us plenty, and some days it still feels fragile as glass. But it's real, little diplomat. It's the realest thing I've ever been part of." "I believe you," Vesa said, and found that she meant it completely. "I will tell them the truth, Director Cora. whether they wished to hear it or not. Cora's rough face softened into something like a smile. "That's all any of us can ask," she said. "Safe travels, Vesa Rin. I have a feeling you're about to have a very interesting conversation." Vesa boarded the return transport with her report secured on her datapad, her mind already rehearsing the words she would need to convince a chamber full of cautious, war-weary beings that humanity's true strength was not a danger to be feared, but a gift the entire galaxy might learn from, if only they were willing to listen. As the ship rose from New Meridian's surface, leaving the farming colony and its grateful, rebuilding population behind, Vesa allowed herself one last look through the viewport. Below, she could see the paper flower the young boy had given her, still sitting carefully wrapped in cloth in her travel case. She had decided, somewhere in the long night of writing her report, that she would bring it with her to the assembly chamber, not as evidence, but as a reminder of what she was truly there to defend. The journey back to Concord Station would take 3 days. Vesa spent every hour of it preparing, knowing that the hardest part of her mission was not the battle she had witnessed, but the argument still waiting for her among the black stone walls of the assembly chamber. The black stone chamber was fuller than Vesa had ever seen it. Word of the Battle of New Meridian had spread quickly through assembly channels, and every delegation wanted to hear the young observer's report firsthand. Vesa stood at the speaker's platform, her travel case resting by her feet, the paper flower wrapped safely inside, and looked out at the sea of faces from 100 different worlds, all waiting for her to explain what she had found. Elder Osimir sat in his place at the head of the chamber, his ancient eyes fixed on her with quiet patience. Korath of the Threk sat forward in his seat, arms crossed, clearly expecting confirmation of some hidden human arsenal. Threl Vondu of the Kalen watched her with cautious curiosity, his blue fingers drumming softly against his armrest. "Ambassador Vesa Rin," Osimir said formally, "the Assembly recognizes you to deliver your report on Project Sanctuary and the Battle of New Meridian. Speak freely." Vesa took a breath and began. "I was sent to find humanity's secret weapon," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye upon her. "I traveled to Earth expecting to uncover a hidden laboratory, a forbidden technology, some device capable of explaining victories that seemed impossible against our understanding of their military strength. I did not find any such thing." A murmur passed through the chamber. Korath's frown deepened. "Instead," Vesa continued, "I found a building full of orphan children from a dozen different species, cared for without regard to where they came from, or what side their parents had once fought on. I found a Threx exile, once ready to die alone in the black after her homeworld disowned her, who now raises hundreds of refugee children as her own. I found Za families, Vosk survivors, and human colonists living together, not because any treaty required it, but because someone, once, chose to offer them shelter when no one else would." She paused, letting the chamber absorb this before continuing. "Then I witnessed the Battle of New Meridian. 63 Drenner raider vessels attacked an undefended farming colony. No assembly fleet arrived in time to help, because no assembly protocol recognized the danger quickly enough. But a coalition fleet did arrive, 31 ships strong, crewed by humans, Threx exiles, Za scientists and Vosk survivors, none of them ordered there by any government, all of them answering a call that came from nothing more than memory and gratitude." "This proves nothing," Korath interrupted, unable to hold his silence any longer. "A coalition of allies is not unusual. Every species builds alliances. This does not explain how such a small force defeated a raider fleet nearly twice its size." "It explains everything, Delegate Korath," Vesa said, turning to face him directly. "If you understand what held that coalition together, it was not a treaty. It was not mutual self-interest, calculated in the careful language the Assembly usually uses to describe alliances. It was loyalty, built over years, one act of kindness at a time, until an entire network of grateful strangers became willing to risk their lives for each other without being asked." She reached into her travel case and withdrew the small paper flower, holding it up for the chamber to see. Several delegates leaned forward, confused by the strange, fragile object in the young diplomat's hand. "A child gave me this," she said, after the battle ended, "because he believed I had helped save his town. I had done nothing but watch and take notes. But he thanked me anyway, because in his experience, when danger came, someone always showed up to help. That expectation, Delegate Korath, that certainty that help will come, is worth more than any weapon this assembly has ever measured. It is the reason humanity's fleets win battles they should lose. Not because they have secret technology, but because they are never truly outnumbered. Every ally they have ever helped stands ready to help them in return. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Threl Vondu was the first to speak again, his voice quieter than before. You are saying the human strength is kindness. I am saying their strength is kindness practiced consistently, for years, without expectation of reward, until it became something the entire galaxy underestimated, because it did not fit into the shape of a weapon, Vesa said. The Assembly has spent 6 years asking what humanity built in secret. The truth is, they built nothing in secret at all. They built it in the open, in shelters and refugee camps and rebuilt colonies. And none of us thought to look, because we were trained to search for danger, not for kindness. Elder Osimir rose slowly from his seat, and the chamber quieted immediately out of respect for the old Dravith's age and wisdom. I would like to hear from others who were present at New Meridian, he said. Director Cora of Earth's Sanctuary Program has traveled here at my invitation, along with several representatives of the Coalition fleet. I believe the Assembly should hear their voices, as well as our observers' report. The chamber doors opened, and Cora entered, her tall frame filling the doorway, followed by a Za scientist whose science vessel had fought at New Meridian, and a Vosk elder whose grandchildren now lived at the sanctuary. One by one, they addressed the Assembly, each telling their own piece of the story. Cora spoke of the day a human transport found her dying in the black and gave her a reason to live again. The Za scientist spoke of a colony destroyed by disaster, rebuilt with human aid when no one else answered their distress calls. The Vosk elder, his voice trembling with old grief and new hope, spoke of a species nearly forgotten by the galaxy, given a home and a future by people who owed them nothing. By the time the testimonies ended, even Korath sat silent, his earlier certainty visibly shaken. Threl Vondu had lowered his head, deep in thought. The chamber, usually so quick to debate and argue, remained quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what had been said. Finally, Osimir spoke again, his ancient voice carrying the full authority of his long years of service. The Assembly came here today searching for a weapon, he said. We have found something the old records have no proper category for. I propose that we create one. Let it be recorded in Assembly law that humanity's strength has been fully investigated and found to pose no threat to the peace of this galaxy. Further, I propose that Earth be granted full voting membership in this Assembly, not as a cautious probationary member, but as a species whose contributions to the safety and welfare of others have already exceeded what most full members achieve in 100 years. The vote that followed was not close. Delegation after delegation raised their support, some enthusiastically, others more slowly, still processing what they had heard, but by the end, the Chamber's decision was unanimous. Earth would be granted full membership, and Project Sanctuary would be formally recognized as a model the Assembly hoped other member species might one day choose to follow. Sarah Chen, who had traveled to Concord Station to witness the vote in person, embraced Vesa warmly once the session ended, the formal proceedings dissolving into a rare moment of genuine celebration within the usually solemn chamber. You did it, Sarah said. You told them the truth, even when it wasn't the answer they expected. I only reported what I saw, Vesa said, though she could not fully hide her pride. The truth did the rest of the work itself. Months later, Vesa returned to Earth, not as an Assembly observer this time, but as a friend, invited by Cora to visit the sanctuary once more. The building looked the same as she remembered, bright and full of laughter, children of a dozen species playing together in the garden beneath a warm afternoon sun. She found the young boy who had given her the paper flower, now a little taller, and showed him that she still carried it, carefully preserved, in a small frame she had made for it back on Concord Station. I told the whole Assembly about your flower, she said, crouching down to his height. They decided humanity deserved a real seat among the stars because of people like you. The boy grinned, not fully understanding the weight of what she meant. and ran off to rejoin his friends, Human and Threx and Za children, tumbling together across the grass without a single thought for the old fears and suspicions that had once separated their peoples. Vesa stood and watched them for a long while, the warm sun on her pale blue skin, and thought of Elder Osimir's words from so long ago. A history of great cruelty and great kindness, often from the same people, in the same lifetime. She understood now that the Assembly's mistake had never been about missing a hidden weapon. It had been about forgetting to look for something far more powerful, hiding in plain sight all along, a species that had chosen, again and again, to be kind when it would have been easier not to be, until that choice became strong enough to hold back an army. The galaxy, she thought, still had much to learn from humanity, but for the first time since her mission began, she believed it was ready to start listening.